Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard, the third in our Orchard series. Tonight we will be learning Parshat Lech Lecha. We have three different insights that we will share. The first one is, we know that the name of the Parsha is Lech Lecha, because this is the first command, the first time, at least in the Torah, that God speaks directly to Avraham and tells him, Lech lecha me'artzecha, moladatecha u'beit avicha, el ha'oretz asher areka. Go from your land, from your birthplace, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And the language is Lech lecha, which simply or literally could be you go, Lech Lecha. But all the commentaries over the years have pointed out that Lech Lecha is actually the same letters, Lech and Lecha, Lamed Chaf Sofit, and it can be interpreted as Lech, which means go on a physical journey, Lecha, meaning that there will be a parallel inner journey that you will have to go on as well. And that the outer and inner journeys are, they coincide, they're parallel, they're essentially connected. We know that Avram had 10 tests. The last test, it's called Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Yitzchak, also begins with God saying, Lech Lecha, to Har Moriah, the same words as the words that open this parsha, Lech Lecha. But in the middle, at the middle of the story of Avram as it appears in the Torah, it's at the end of this week's parsha, there is another variation grammatically on the word Lech Lecha, and that is right before God commands Avram with circumcision, which will become the physical sign of the covenant between God and Israel. He says to him, Hitalech lefanai v'tiyeh tamim. Walk before me, Lech, Hitalech, which is like even a stronger reflexive type of language. Hitalech lefanai v'tiyeh tamim. Walk before me and be whole, sincere, wholehearted. The word tamim, tam. The first time we see the word tam is with Noach, because it says that Noach was also tamim, and it says that he walked with God. So everyone makes the comparison that Noach walked with God, which is a pretty high level here. But God says to Avram, walk before me. So we want to look at what does that mean to walk before God. So before we do that, I want to point out that everything about Avraham has to do with spiritual growth. Here he's told Lech Lecha, to go. He's called Avraham HaIvri. HaIvri comes from the word to cross over, to transcend, to pass over, meaning tremendous physical and spiritual movement. That's what we learned about Avram HaIvri. Ivri, again, from the word la'avor. And so Avram crossed over the Euphrates River. That's on the physical level. That's like the Lecha, but on the Lech. But on the level of Lecha, Avram crossed the we'll call it invisible red line between him and the rest of the world. The rest of the world was pagan and idol worshippers. And Avram crossed over a spiritual boundary that no one had crossed over in such a way. So everything about Avram is about walking, progressing, moving, improving, elevating. So we already mentioned a few. He crossed over the Euphrates, crossed over to monotheism. He is told to leave everything behind and go and follow God to where he will show him, to Israel. The last test is also, but there's even more. There's even more that when Avram first comes into the land, so it says, and Avram passed through the land until the place of Shechem, until the plain of Moreh. So again, the word passed here is la'avor. He crossed the land. He walked through the land. And then it says, and he moved from there to the mountain east of Beit El, and he pitched his tent. In other words, I'm reading all of these quotes to show that constantly the different words for moving, walking, traveling, journeying is used in conjunction with Avram. Then it says, these are not verse after verse. And then it says, and there was a famine in the land, and Avram descended to Egypt to sojourn there because the famine was severe in the land. So here he descended to Egypt, and later he came out of Egypt and returned to Israel. And then it says, and he went on his journeys from the south and until Beit El, until the place where his tent had been previously, between Beit El and between Ai. And then one last one that we'll mention, God says to Avram, and I will make your seed like the dust of the earth, so that if a man will be able to count the dust of the earth, so will your seed be counted. Rise, walk in the land to its length and its breadth, for I will give it to you. So here we're told, Avram is told to walk the breadth and the length of the land. And one of my absolute favorite teachings from Reb Shlomo is based on this verse. He said, if you're ever walking in Eretz Yisrael, you're on a tiyul, and you come to a place and you feel so connected, like essentially connected, more than, let's say the tour guide says, in this place, this is what happened. So that's pretty awesome also. You're standing in a place where some important event happened in Jewish history. So we feel the energy, we feel connected. But Reb Shlomo was talking about something different, that you're in somewhere in Eretz Yisrael and you just feel a deep connection to that place. So Reb Shlomo said what's going on here is from this verse, that Avram walked the length and the breadth of the land. And when he was in the place that you feel this incredible connection, he was thinking of you. Now, this is just such an awesome Torah, because we all come from Avram and Sarah. We all come from Avram and Sarah, and especially those who have the book One Was Avraham. So we know what an archetypal figure Avram was. Everything he thought, said, and did marked all of Jewish history. But this idea that Reb Shlomo was giving over was in that place that you feel so connected. That's where Avram Avinu was thinking of you specifically. I've always found that Torah incredibly meaningful and very real, very, very real. So if we look at our different relationships with God, there's one relationship where we serve God. We actually, when God took us out of Egypt, he said, you're no longer servants or slaves to Egypt. Now you are my servant. Now that is said in like the most positive way. Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest description or superlative of Moshe Rabbeinu was he was called Eved Hashem, a servant of God, an Eved Ne'aman, a faithful servant. So on one level, we serve God. We serve God by trying to do the mitzvah. God commands us to do the mitzvah. So we show our loyalty, we show our devotion, our belief in God and his will as revealed through the Torah by doing the commandments. So that makes us like a servant of God. In one place in the Torah, it says, Banim atem l'Hashem Elokecha. You are children to God. So that's a whole different level, much more intimate, much closer, is this idea of being children of God. That's why in English, in the Chumash, we're called Bnei Yisrael, and it's usually translated as the children of Israel, because that is one of the ways that we relate to God. We call God Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven. Avinu Shebashamayim. And then there's another level where we are partners with God. This is a whole different level that the sages tell us in a few different instances. For example, someone who makes Kiddush Friday night becomes a partner with God in the creation of the world. Because when we're testifying that we believe that God created the world, we actually become active partners with God in the creation of the world. And we see that in the last three words of creation, the last three words of Shabbat, which is that God made to do, bara Elokim la'asot. All that God rested from everything that he had made to do. So everyone asks, what does to do mean? It seems redundant, but we know that there are no words in the Torah that are redundant. So we're told everything that God made to do means to fix, and it makes us partners with God, because God didn't finish creation. Creation is not a one-time event and then it's a finished product. Creation is still in process, and we become partners with God in the rectification of the world, the betterment of the world. And then we have what we began the class with, when God says to Avram, Hita lech lefanai v'tiyeh tamim, walk before me. So this is a different nuance. It's more than serving God. It's more than being children of God. It's even more than being a partner with God. God says, walk before me. So the implication is, when someone walks before someone else, they are now leading the way. So God is hinting that he wants Israel to take a proactive stance in the world, and in a sense to walk before him. Now, it doesn't nullify or negate any of these other types of relationships, but it's just pointing out that there's a certain level, a certain attitude that God wants us to adopt, where we not only are partners with God in fixing the world, but we take a proactive, out front, cutting edge kind of attitude with fixing the world. So how do we understand this even deeper? How do we go about walking before God? So we begin with making our will his will, or making his will our will. Because if we're walking before God, but we're not walking in tandem, in the spirit that God wants us to walk before him, so what have we accomplished? We're just getting in front and we don't know where we're leading. So by making his will our will, so that is how we can step forward with the confidence of, as it were, leading the way. And we're leading the way is because this is God's will. When God says this to Avram, he's not saying it just to Avram. Avram, as an archetypal figure, is representative of all the Jewish people. And so therefore, for us to be a light unto the nations means taking a positive, proactive stance in the world. And so here we see these four words, Hita Lech Lefanai V'Tiyeh Tamim, in a sense is the fulfillment of Lech Lecha. That is the beginning of the Parsha. God first talks to Avram and says, Lech Lecha, but the fulfillment is really walk before me. So this is just a very awesome thing to contemplate, how in general, the Jewish people are a leader nation. That's what it means. And when we received the Torah at Sinai, in the days leading up to receiving the Torah, so God called us a nation of priests. And we know that we're not all Kohanim. So what does it mean, a nation of priests? Well, the Kohen is the leader. He's the representative of God. And so therefore, God was telling the Jewish people that all of you need to be leaders in the world, in the practical world, in small ways and big ways. It could be in communities. It can be in places of worship. It can be in politics. It can be in the workplace, in the professions. Whatever it is, God was blessing the Jewish people to walk before him, to take a positive role in healing the world, fixing the world, and making the world a better place. So that is our first insight for tonight. The second one, in a way, is a continuation of this idea, based on the idea that Avram is always moving, always changing, improving, elevating, transcending, that we just discussed, this idea of Lech Lecha, Hita Lech Lefanai V'Tiyeh Tamim, and that he's called Avram HaIvri, the one who crosses over. So this is based on a Torah from Rav Ginsburg. And that is, we see that in Avram's life, he was always changing. He went through many different phases in his life. And if we just follow the stories, if we really analyze them and look deeply, then we can see it. And especially when we also look at the different midrashim, because much of what we know about Avram is pre-coming to Israel. Because Avram first appears at the end of Parshat Noach, and we're told virtually nothing about him. Much of it is in the Midrashim. So here, and I want to mention that Rabbi Ari Khan has a beautiful explanation of why does the story of Avram really begin this week's parsha with Lech Lecha. And then we learn much about Avram. At the end of Noach, we just learned that his father was Terach. Terach had 3 children, and who they married, and that they left Ur Kasdim on their way to come to Eretz Canaan. That's all we know about Avram. And yet, in the Midrashim, tells a whole rich story of how Avram came to monotheism and how he bucked the system. And so Rabbi Khan asks, why wasn't this included in the Torah? So he says something very, very important, is the Midrashim explain that Avram came to a understanding of one God through an intellectual process. He really analyzed life. He was considered a great astrologer. He understood nature. He understood the workings of the world. And through a process of elimination, deep meditation, analysis, he comes to the understanding that there is one God. Lech Lecha, this is God speaking to Avram. This is called revelation. And so Rabbi Khan points out that the Torah chooses to begin our story of Avram with revelation in order to make the point is that intellectual inquiry can only go so far. One can glean a lot about the world we live in, ourselves, and God through the intellectual process. But ultimately, Torah and Judaism is based on God's revelation, the revelation at Sinai, the revelation of God to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and to all of the prophets. This is where the crux of Torah and Jewish tradition comes from, is direct revelation from God. And so the Torah begins really the story of Avram from revelation, not to minimize intellectual pursuit, but just to make the point that ultimately, as we're going to see now, intellectual inquiry can only go so far. So in the beginning, Rav Ginsburg points out that Avram was very attached to truth. In other words, he came to the conclusion that there is one God. That became his truth. That became the truth that he founded his life on. And he believed that the entire world, universe, existence is based on the idea that there is one God and God's oneness in the world. And so he took that emet, that feeling of truth, and he made it his banner. And therefore, he, as the Midrash says, he went against his father, who was an idol worshiper. And then he was taken to Nimrod. And Nimrod gave him many, many kind of ways out of his insistence on the truth of one God. And Avram would not have any part of it, to the point that he threatened to throw him in a fiery furnace if he insisted on his teachings of one God. And Avram stuck by what he considered true. So the whole process by which Avram comes to monotheism and in a sense, chooses God, and God chooses Avram, was through his belief in the truth of what he had found. When he comes to Israel, though, we see one of the verses that we didn't quote about movement, which is a very, very important one, and we'll get to it also in the third insight tonight, is Vayisa Avram haloch v'nasoa hanegba. And Avram, he's still Avram at this point, traveled, he walked and he journeyed towards the south. There's actually three different words for traveling, for journeying in one verse. Vayisa Avram haloch v'nasoa hanegba. Rav Ginsburg points out hanegba means to the south. When we just had it in Sukkot, when we shake lulav. So no matter where we are standing, we envision the directions and their connections to the ushpizing, the personalities. Avram is always the south, and Avram represents chesed. So Rav Ginsburg says this verse, in a deeper sense, means Avram was always traveling and journeying towards chesed. And that was his Lech Lecha. In other words, just like we said before, Rabbi Kahn was saying that the story of Avram, as we know it, is really starting with revelation. And so Avram's hold on the truth didn't weaken, but a different part of his personality began to come out. And that is, we always say that Avram was the epitome. He was the archetypal figure of chesed. And all the stories of he and Sarah having an open tent, and that is how they spread the word of one God. He was like a magnet that people came to Avram, and he fed them and he taught them. He took care of them, and he showed tremendous chesed. Many of the stories in the Midrash and in the Torah itself are about his attitude of chesed. So here we see Avram, he didn't leave his belief in the truth behind, but he moved towards chesed, towards the south, hanegba. Another movement that Avram made was towards beauty. And we see this in one instance where in this week's Parsha, that when Avram comes to Israel, almost as soon as he gets there, there's a famine. And Avram has to leave. He has to go down, he goes down to Egypt. There's no food. And on the way down, so this is the story, which we're not going to analyze tonight, is where he asked his wife to say, "You are my sister," because he was fearful that if people knew she was his wife, she was incredibly beautiful, that he would be killed so that they could take her. So the Midrash says, he says to her, "Because you're so beautiful, that's why I'm asking you this." So the Midrash is like, well, is this like a new revelation? He didn't know that she was so beautiful. And so it said that he actually, it didn't compute with him her beauty. Every Friday night we sing Eshet Chayil, the woman of valor. And we say this idea, Sheker Achen Behevel Yofi, that beauty is deceitful, and it's like fleeting. It's like vanity. But a woman who fears God, this should be praised. And so, as it were, Avram, his whole life was attracted to Sarah's righteousness. It wasn't that he wasn't aware that she was so beautiful, but that was very, very secondary. And here, all of a sudden, it computes that her beauty, her physical beauty, is a reflection of her spiritual beauty. And in fact, the Midrash says he actually came to this realization when he was looking at water and he saw her reflection, and he, like revelation, that she was beautiful. So how can we understand this on a deeper level? So in Judaism, there's an idea called hidur mitzvah, making mitzvot beautiful. And this we learn from the Song of the Sea, where we say, Ze keli ve'anvehu. This is, we're told that the vision of God was so real that people, especially the children, like pointed and said, Ze keli, this is my God. Like it was so palpable, God's presence. Ve'anvehu can mean, and I will make him beautiful. Meaning the way I'm going to serve God is through beauty, by beautifying the mitzvot. So that's this idea of hidur mitzvah. And that's why, let's say on Shabbat, we go out of our way to wear our best clothes, to put out our best culturally, how do you say that? Dishes, tongue twister. Put out our best dishes, serve our finest food, finest drink. We clean our houses. Everything is to make Shabbos physically beautiful. But that physical beauty reflects how we experience Shabbat, the beauty of Shabbat. So Rav Ginsburg reveals what we're talking about in gematria. So the numerical value for truth, emet, is 441. The word for beauty, yofi, equals 100. So 441 and 100 equals 541 equals Yisrael. That Yisrael is this beautiful combination of truth and beauty, of physicality and spirituality, physical beauty and spiritual beauty. That is Yisrael. And then Rav Ginsburg takes it one more step, because again, when we talk about Avram, we do talk about his truth that he discovered. We talk about his discovery of beauty, his faith, as we'll discuss in a minute. But the one thing we talk about, because Avram is most associated with the sphere of chesed. So if you add chesed, 72, to 541, you get 613, the 613 mitzvot. So this is just what's called a numerical gem, that we take truth and beauty and chesed, all of them very important to Judaism, and you get the 613 mitzvot. And we're told that, of course, the Torah had not been given yet, so we didn't have the 613 mitzvot. But we're told that Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, they all kept the mitzvahs of the Torah. So how do we understand this? They hadn't been given yet. So we're told that through deep understanding of God, deep understanding of the relationship between God and the soul, an understanding of the world, that they intuited the concepts and the truths and the foundational teachings behind the mitzvot. And so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in one of the Talmudic passages, says, well, how did Avram do this? And he said that Avram's kidneys, which is considered the house of intuition, the seat of intuition, became like buckets full of water. And for those who come to the Tuesday class where we're learning the spiritual nature of water, so we always say, Ein mayim ela Torah. Anytime that water is mentioned in the Torah is an allusion to Torah itself. And so here, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that his intuition was full of the waters of Torah, what would later become the 613 mitzvot of the Torah. So now we just want to add one more movement that Avram went through. Here we talked about from truth to beauty, from truth to chesed. Again, not diminishing his belief in truth, the truth that he had found. And that is his movement towards faith. And again, we'll just mention Ari Khan saying that's why the story in the Torah of Avram beginning with revelation is because this is connected to faith. Now, in Judaism, faith and truth are not contradictory. Many people think of truth as blind faith. I believe in something, it doesn't matter if all the facts fly in the face of what I believe. This is what I believe, and that's it. It has nothing to do with actual knowledge or wisdom or fact. That is not obviously a Jewish way. That Judaism unites faith and knowledge. And we see this in the Shema. The Shema is called the fundamental statement of faith in Judaism. And we see in the Shema, there's two large letters. The ayin of the word Shema, hear, O Israel, and the dalet of echad, that God is one. So when you read it in that order, ayin dalet, it spells witness. In other words, we have the faith in God, and we become God's witnesses. This is like we said already. Hita lech lefanai v'tia tamim. Walk before me, be my witnesses, be my representatives in the world. If you take those two letters that are large and you reverse them, it's da, to know. And so here in the Shema, we have faith and knowledge. And so when we take the word Adam, Adam was created in the image of God. So Rav Ginsburg teaches that Adam is the three letters of Adam. The Aleph stands for Emunah, faith. The Dalet stands for Dat, knowledge. And the Mem stands for Ma'aseh, action. This is such a fundamental Torah here. Again, Emunah, Dat, Ma'aseh, faith, knowledge, and action. In other words, to merit to be in the image of God, we have to take our faith, ground it in knowledge, or we have to take our knowledge and express it in faith. But ultimately, it has to be translated to ma'aseh, to action. So I'm going to go back to this verse. V'yisa Avram haloch v'nasoa negba. And Avram traveled and journeyed to the south. And we learned to the south means towards chesed. But when we are facing east, the right is chesed, is Avram. And the word yamin is cognate with emunah. Yamin, emunah, the same basic letters. And so here we see not only was Avram traveling towards chesed, but each test that God gave him was really a test of faith. And so Avram's faith grew and grew and grew. He begins with emet, and now he's taking that emet and grounding it and elevating it into faith. So one more idea here, and this is the last of the test, Akedat Yitzchak. And we said this also begins with Lech Lecha, the words Lech Lecha. This becomes the ultimate test of faith, that intellectually it made no sense at all. God had promised Avram that his children would inherit the land and would carry on the tradition. And here he's told to take Yitzchak and to offer him up. So on the level of seichel, of intellect, it made absolutely no sense. No sense. And yet the test was of faith. For those who have Orchard of Delights, there's a whole article called The Silence of Abraham, because everyone points out that Avram didn't question God. He must have, in his own mind, had a million questions. How could this be? But he understood it was a test of faith. And without going into it, you're all invited to look at the article in Orchard of Delights. It might be on our website also. I believe it is in Parshat V'Ye'era, next week's Parsha, that in a very, very deep way, Avram was testing God, because he knew in his gut, in his kidneys, that God, his will wasn't that he actually do this, but he had to go through the motion in order to show his faith. But for a deeper understanding, please read that article. And so one of the deep understandings, I just learned this recently from a Torah from Rav Ginsburg, is Avram appears that he's about to sacrifice Yitzchak, and the angel of God comes and says, don't lay a hand. Now God knows that you have yira, that you have true fear and awe of God. And he doesn't sacrifice him. And so Rav Ginsburg points out, it's very subtle, very subtle. But as we said, Avram begins from the place of emet, of intellectual discovery of one God. And one might think, like we talked about blind faith, that to have true faith, we have to, as it were, throw emet out the window. We just have to go with faith, no matter what emet or our mind tells us. So Rav Ginsburg points out in a very subtle way that one of the lessons that God was trying to teach Avram is that in the process of coming to faith, one does not have to sacrifice one's intellectual truths. They don't have to be sacrificed. They can coexist together. And that's what we learned about the name Adam. Emunah, Dat, and Maaseh. Faith, knowledge, and action. Now we'll go to the third insight of the evening. And this is going to revolve around the number 10. In Orchard of Delights, I make a point of showing the connection of the number 100 in the life of Avram. The command Lech Lecha, as I mentioned before, Lech and Lecha are the same letters, and they have the same numerical value. Each one, Lech is 50 and Lecha is 50. So together, it equals 100. Lech Lecha. So 100 is a very important number because in the last test, again, God says, Lech Lecha. Avram is 100 years old when Yitzchak is born. So in a sense, the birth of Yitzchak is the fulfillment of the Lech Lecha. Because when we're saying go to yourself, to parallel journeys, so our children are the deepest essence of our being. That is how we relate to our children. They're coming from the deepest part of us. So Yitzchak is born at Avram's age of 100. And then later, when Avram passes away, it says that Yitzchak sowed in that year, sowed grain, and the yield was 100-fold. So this represents Yitzchak carrying on the tradition from Avram. So that I already gave over in Orchard of Delights. But we see the number 10 is very important here because Avram had 10 tests. 10 squared equals 100. And we're told in Kabbalah, any number, when it's squared, reveals its fuller essence, fuller manifestation. So the 10 tests of Avram, when multiplied by themselves, equals 100. This is connected to the 10 nations that God promises Avram, 7 of which we conquered or we settled in Eretz Yisrael. And we're told the other 3 will only come at the time of Mashiach. But Avram was promised 10 nations. In the first verse of this parsha, Lech Lecha, there are 10 alephes. 10 alephes. And we want to understand the significance of that. When we look at the first verse of the Torah, there are 6 alephs. And we're told because the word aleph means Aleph, so from that, the sages learned that this cycle of history will last for 6,000 years. 6 alephs, meaning 6 Aleph. That will be the cycle of history. Right now, we're in 5784, and we are coming close to the 6,000th. And that's why there's so much anticipation for the coming of Mashiach, because according to tradition, in the 7th millennium will be the Messianic era. But in the verse about Lech Lecha, there are 10 alephs. And God says, leave your land, leave your birthplace, leave your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. And then we're told that God actually promises Avram 10 nations, to inherit 10 nations. So we see here that this is alluded to in these 10 alephs. In Bereshit, there's a question. Why does the Torah begin with a bet? Why doesn't it begin with an aleph? Aleph is the first letter of the Torah. And one might think the Torah should begin with an aleph. And so the answer is given in the introduction to the Zohar, that all the letters came before God and said, please start the Torah with me. And they started from the last letter. And each letter came and presented its case, why the Torah should begin with that letter. And God very nicely acknowledges that that's a good idea, but goes through the whole Aleph Bet until we got to Bet. And the Bet says you should start the Torah with me because my letter begins the word Baruch, bracha, blessing. And with me, we will bless you. 100 blessings a day will come to bless you. Baruchu et Hashem hamavarach. And God says, I like that idea. So everyone else, well, what happens to the aleph? The aleph doesn't even actually have a chance to bring its case. So some say that the aleph was rewarded by becoming the first letter of the 10 Commandments. Another idea is the aleph, that it kind of, in a sense, precedes creation, is the small aleph of Vayikra, the beginning of the book of Leviticus, where God calls Moshe to enter into the tabernacle. And there's a small aleph. And what I would like to propose is, also we could say that before Bereshit, what is there? There's only the infinite light of God. Before time and space, before in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And so the aleph is the first word of Ein, the infinite, and the first letter of Or, the infinite light of God. It's preceding the Bet. The Bet represents the beginning of duality. Bet equals 2. So another way we can understand the aleph is the aleph that precedes creation is the aleph of Avraham, the first letter of Avram's name. Why would I say this? First of all, we have the teaching that when a thought arose in God's mind to create the world, Yisrael Allah b'machshava techila. The first thought of God was Israel. And all of Israel comes from Avraham. And then in the second retelling of the story, so it begins, Ve'ela toldot shemayim v'oretz behi baram. These are the generations of heaven and earth in their creation. And we've learned this a number of times. The sages say, don't read it behi baram, in their creation. Read it be'avraham, because the letters of behi baram in their creation are the exact same letters as Avraham, just combined differently. And so this is the idea. And for those who have, one was Avram. This is the first chapter. This is the archetypal understanding of who Avraham is. He is the chariot of not only chesed in the world, because God creates the world through chesed, but he is the actual purpose of creation. When God creates Adam, Adam is called the crown of creation. The ultimate purpose of creation was to get to Adam. Adam also begins with an aleph. And we're told that Avram is the essential reincarnation of Adam. Just like all human beings ultimately come from Adam, every Jew comes from Avram and Sarah. So here, this is just an incredible understanding of this number 10. 10 and 100 appear in Avram's life over and over again. But here we're looking at a more primordial revelation of 10. Again, the 10 alephs in the verse of Lech Lecha, which are connected to the 10 nations that Avram will inherit, which is connected to the 10 tests that Avram has in order to merit being chosen by God as the one to walk before him. I'm like combining all of our Torah for tonight as one. And here we see one more thing. If you take we'll call it the invisible aleph before the bet of Bereshit, and you just read the first two letters, it's Av, Father. So when in this week's Parsha, when Avram is given the extra letter Hey and becomes Avraham, so God explains what does Avram mean? That he would be Av Hamon Goyim. He would be the father of many nations. So this is alluded to in the Aleph that is, as it were, preceding the Bet. That the whole creation is for the sake of Avraham. V'hi baram, Yisrael Allah b'machshava techila. So this is just a very, very beautiful idea. And with that, we will end with a blessing that we're learning about Avram for the next 3 weeks. Avram becomes the main focus of the study in the Torah. And in truth, Avram paved the way for all of us, including the whole world. That is the premise of the book. One was Avram. Avram is a trailblazer. He's an innovator. He's an initiator. He's always moving and traveling and growing. So we should have the blessing to always walk in the footsteps of Avram.